Hey guys, this is MK and I'm your host for this podcast. Today we're going to be discussing the case of Uganda. And in this case, the children of Uganda accused the government of Uganda of doing so many things or not doing so many things during a war that was happening in their country for 20 years against the rebels called the Lord Resistance Army, the LRA, in the northern part of Uganda. Okay, let's get into it. This case was brought in 2005 by the Center of Human Rights by the University of Pretoria. Okay, it was brought, but then it started in 2010. This was the first ever case to be brought to the committee, so it was such a new thing, and it was the case that started it off. Now, it was not the first case to be had. It was the first case to be brought. The first case to be had was the Kenyan one. We listened to that last week. If you did not, go back and listen to that episode because you're going to learn more of the things that we talk about now. Now, this case again started in 2010 because that is when the committee was ready. Like they had got their shit together, they had guidelines and the rules of procedure for the committee, and they were like, hey, I know you brought this case here before, but now go back and use the guidelines that we're giving you and the procedures and bring this back. Basically, they did that and they brought it. In 2010, Uganda submitted their written arguments too. And so what I mean by this is they're like, so you guys are accusing us of this. Now, this is what we are saying to defend ourselves. That is their written arguments. And then in 2011 November, they had their oral arguments. This committee allows both parties to come in, give their arguments before the committee. Now, at the end of November, the Ugandan government was like, hey, I know we're talking about something that happened 20 years ago. So can you just come to our country and see that we have changed? We have changed. And in 2012, they issued a formal invitation. And then in 2013, the committee decided to go visit and see for themselves. So they met with stakeholders in the lives of children in Uganda, that is NGOs, UN, every other person that was involved in that mess. They met with them to see the situation. How was it then and how is it now before they made their final decision? Now, let me take you back to the history of this case. For those 20 years, the LRA was the rebel group and the LRA was trying to overthrow the government, and in the north part of Uganda specifically, it's where it got so bad. They had taken over that whole section. Now, in that section, children were being abused sexually. They were not going to school. They were not having the best access to health. And also, they were being used in the war as taken in as wives, taken in as part of the military, just to mention a few things. And these are some of the things that are being brought to the committee to be like, hey, during this war, the government of Uganda had the right to protect children from these things, and it failed to do so. And Uganda, in their defense, remember they give their written arguments, they said, hey, we understand what the LRA does in our country is our responsibility. We get that. But we were in a war and we did the best we could with the resources that we could. What else were we supposed to do? We were in a war. These people were attacking us. They were killing us. They were taking our children. And we did our best to protect them, but we failed. Are you prosecuting us for failing? That was basically the root of their defense. Every other thing they were accused of, that is how they defended themselves. Also, when the University of Pretoria was asked, because they were the ones who were bringing this case on behalf of the children of Uganda, they're like, hey, so why did you not take this case to Uganda? Because remember last week I said you have to finish all the legal recourse in your country before you bring a case to the committee. When asked why they did not do this, they said this issue has been happening for 20 years, so Uganda is very well aware of this issue and they did nothing. And number two, the north was pretty dangerous, so gathering evidence in that area was going to be so difficult, and there was just no way for us to go up there and gather this evidence. And then Uganda in their defense was like, hey, now that you said it was so difficult to gather evidence to bring to our courts, how then was it easy for you to gather evidence and bring to this court? This issue is going to be so important, so I need you to listen very carefully. Have it in the back of your mind, evidence. So you guys were able to gain evidence to bring here, but you did not have evidence to bring in our courts. Oh, I smell fish. Anyway, the committee agreed to listen to this case, and also Uganda was like, hey, there's a similar case going on in the ICC. So I think there's a conflict of interest, and the two legal proceedings cannot be going on at the same time. But then the committee was like, hey, I know what you're trying to do, and it's not going to happen. This case, the case that we're discussing at this moment in the committee, is against the government of Uganda for failing to protect the children of Uganda. But the ICC case was a case against the LRA, which is the army that we're talking about in the north, the rebel army, and what they did to Ugandans in general. All of them, children, adults, everyone, the government, etc., all of them. So these are two different cases. Although they have the same fabric, they are two different cases. One is against the government for failing to protect children, and the other one is against the army for all the atrocities and the crimes against humanity they did in Uganda for more than 20 years and the neighboring countries. I hope that is very clear. Now let's get to the nitty-gritties of this. What were they accusing Uganda of doing? Number one, of violating these rights. Number one, recruiting and the use of children in the army. This is a violation of Article 22. Disruption of the rights of education, Article 11, we discussed this last week. Interference with the right to live, survive, and develop. Last week we talked about this, Article 5. Disruption of the right to enjoy the best attainable physical, mental, and spiritual health during a war, 14. We're going to discuss that. And children not being protected from sexual violence and abuse, 16 and 27, and children not being protected from abduction. Remember, they were being taken in the middle of the night, like this. Anyway, when it comes to the violation of the right of being of not being recruited into the army, this is what the children of Uganda were saying. Children were also recruited into the government army. It was just not the LRA. They were being recruited into the children's army. They were the children that were being rescued by the LRA. The government were using them for information. They were using them as informants. They were like, hey, tell us, where were the weapons and all this and all this. And they interviewed them for hours, others for months. Imagine that. You're a child. You're taken from a war, something that is happening that is so dangerous. And then you're being taken into a camp. And in that camp, you're being questioned hours and hours and hours. And Uganda did not even provide evidence to show that they were using child-friendly interviewing methods. None of that. So the assumption is that they were being interviewed in order to get information to use against their enemy. Now, they did not provide the rescued children with the child protection that they needed in less than 48 hours, which is the requirement to say the least. And also, like I said, they used the children to guide them to the LRA and where they said they stored their weapons. And also they failed to accurately determine the age of children before recruiting them into the army. So they were like, you look 16, you look 18, okay, you can go, you can stay, something like that. They did not have a concrete way of saying this is a child because they did not have access to birth certificates at that particular time. And also, what else? Yeah, that is it in terms of violation of the right to be protected from being recruited into the army. Now, in this one, the committee found them in violation. They were like, we find you in violation of Article 1 and Article 22. 22 is the war. Now, why? Because during that particular time, Uganda had clause in their constitution that said, I think it's Article 34. Yes, it's Article 34. That says that children below the age of 16 are prevented from being employed from working dangerous jobs. But then when you listen to this, it leaves out the children who are between the age of 16 and 18. They were just there in limbo, like, sorry, what are we supposed to be doing? You did not protect us. But then the African Charter is so clear that children below the age of 18, like if you're 18 and below, you cannot be recruited into a war. But then the government of Uganda had not reflected this, even though they had signed the African Charter on the Rights of the Child long time ago, like 10 years going and above, I think. And they had not changed their constitution, so they were held in violation of that part because the LRA could easily say, hey, The constitution does not forbid us from doing this. And then the government of Uganda is going to be like, what? Change your constitution. Now, let's talk about the right to education. These were the things they were accused of, that they did not allocate enough budget for the right of education. They used schools and militaries for military purposes. And then also there was attacks during schools during the war, and also lack of effective measures to facilitate access to education, and then poor access, availability, and qualities of education in the IDP camps. And Uganda was like, hey, this is a war. There was a war for 20 years. We did the best with the available resources that we had. We were being stretched thin in terms of resources, and the things that we had is what we did. And the rate of education is measured using the 4 A's. So there's availability, acceptability, and adaptability. What this means, the education has to be available. So it does not matter. For this right to be realized, it has to be available. So schools have to be open. I have an allergy. I'm going to sneeze. Oh my god. Excuse me. We go. So schools have to be available. Number 2, they have to be accessible. So you cannot just open schools and then it's not accessible because every time near the school there's a bomb going there. So it's not accessible to children, or it's 800 kilometers from here. How are children supposed to go there and then come back at night? It doesn't make sense. And then acceptability. They have to be taught things that are acceptable by the community. You cannot say things like, wait, sorry, I have a flu. This is why we didn't have an episode for the past 3 weeks. Anyway, acceptability. You cannot start teaching. I saw somewhere online that there's some African schools where they were taught that the benefits of colonization. And I was like, how the hell, what are you talking about? That would not be acceptable to me. The way history was taught to me, thank you, Miss Mogwa, was the effects of colonization, all the negative things that colonization brought into my country and into my whole society as usual, even in Africa. But there are some schools that are being taught the benefits of education. That is not acceptable to me and my community. So something like that. And also adaptability. It has to be adaptable to the times. So there is a war and the physical building of the school is being bombed, or it's not a safe place to be. What now? Are you providing mobile schools? Are you providing schools in the IDP camps? Now, this is what Uganda said. Uganda said they had built IDP camps, schools. They had schools in there. They provided teachers in there with the resources that they had, which was stretched thin. And also after the war, remember this case is being brought after the war. After the war, they did a whole campaign where it was focused on go back to school, stay in school. That was the mantra of the government, trying to get every child to go back to school. And also, remember, they increased the budgeting for schools with so much so that they can show that so that they can encourage children to go back to school, and also they can provide access to schools and school facilities. Now, when the committee was looking at the evidence, and this has to be one exception of a case, because this case was being brought about things that happened in the past, not things that are happening now. So even when they're giving a solution, they're looking at what happened and what the government did after to ensure that this issue is not going into the future. Okay? Now, the committee was like, we do not find evidence that Uganda did all the above things that you're saying, So there's no way we can find them in violation. They tried their best with the resources that I had during a war. Let's go to the right of health. Now, the right of health, like we discussed last time, is a progressive right. What that means is it's realized according to the money, resources, and infrastructure that a country has at that particular time. But it's progressive in nature, meaning that you cannot start going back. So if in your budget this year you allocated 200 billion, next year you cannot allocate 10 billion and say you don't have enough money, and then you allocate the rest of the millions to something else, and then you start looting and all that. That is not the way this right works. You have to prove and open those books and be like, hey, we truly don't have it. We are stretched thin. Like, you see how the situation in DRC and Sudan is right now. People are dying because there's a solid war going on. If the government does not have the resources to provide this, they don't have it, and there's no way they're going to do they're not going to cut themselves, you know? Okay, that is a direct translation of Swahili. I regress. Let's go back to the right to health. So the government was being accused of not providing health facilities, they were not providing medicine and all that, and during this war. And what the government said was, hey, we understand what you're claiming. We do understand. But we have set up health clinics in camps. We are still providing immunization the best way we have. And then we are providing mobile clinic runs which are run by qualified individuals. And also we are also training to ensure that healthcare, especially in the village, is provided. So the government was like, hey, you're not in violation. There's no evidence to show that you violated this right. And they went a step further to say the kind of evidence which would be provided to show that you guys did not provide this right to health would be you misused health fund. Like in your budget, you had an allocation for like 200 billion. Okay, like 200 billion. Someone should give it to me. 200 billion, and you cannot allocate for 50 billion or 150 billion. You don't know where it is. It's not traced in your resources. So that would be a violation. And also, you attack facilities where there's health care service and service providers, that will be a violation. And also interference with aid groups where you're like, hey, don't provide aid for those community, provide for this ones but not this one. That will be interference and discrimination, and that will be a violation. So all these things did not happen. So the committee was like, we did not find any evidence in support of this violation. So was healthcare in that time wishy-washy, and was it something that the government could have improved? Yes. But did they have the resources to do that? No. Did they also violate this? No. So 2 or 3 things can be true at the same time. In terms of sexual violence and abuse, the government soldiers are also being accused of violating children alongside the LRA group. And the government was like, hey, that's not true. And remember when I said we have to think about the evidence? Yeah. The committee was like, there was not enough evidence to show that the government soldiers also the government soldiers also participated in abusing children sexually. So there was no evidence. Like, what you're saying might be true. I give you that. Or it might not be true. Okay? But the evidence that you guys provided for this committee to consider did not have evidence to show that government soldiers participated in this abuse. So there was no violation because there was no evidence. Now, the right to be protected from abduction. Now, the government had to protect the children from abduction, but still the LRA had managed to snatch children from their sleep and take them to their armies. Now, this was a violation of the right to be protected from abduction, but then again, the government had done everything they could to prevent the abduction of children by providing security in these camps, by ensuring that children are moved during the night to ensure that they're not taken, but still the rebels managed to take them. Now, the soldiers of the government might have been incompetent, but they were there doing their job. Some of them were even hurt during this time while they were doing the job. Now, I hope you're not listening to this and thinking MK is such a government apologizer. I promise you, I criticize my government with all the energy that I can, but I'm just saying, according to the facts, there was no evidence that the government was not protecting children from the right of abduction. Okay? Now, after listening to this case, this is what the committee told Uganda to do. They have to make they have to make it very clear that the children that are age 18 and below cannot be recruited in a war. Put it in your constitution. And then also, they have to ensure that the government follows the strict rules to ensure that they're not recruiting children into their army. So if they're in doubt that a person is a child or an adult, if you're looking at a child and you're like, is this a child or an adult? Make sure you ask for their birth certificate and go further to investigate that they're a child and not an adult. And then if they're a child, send them back home to be with their parents. And then when children are accused of conflict, wrongdoing during such a conflict, because they were saying that some children can willingly participate in a war, which is not true. According to the according to the African Charter, children cannot willingly participate in a war. This is something that maybe the OPIC, the UN mechanism, can support, but the African one does not support this. But since they had signed the African Charter, there's no way to say that a 16-year-old voluntarily wanted to go to a war. That is not possible in the African continent. So they were like, hey, make sure no child is going to war. And then the other one was to report within 6 months what they had done to ensure that all this has happened. Now, remember, this case happened 20 years after the war, and Uganda had already done most of the things that the committee asked them to do. Now, is there a document somewhere that shows Uganda did A, B, C, D, Uganda did A and C? No. But we did do some research to see what Uganda had done during this particular time to comply with what the committee had told them to do. Now, all this is listed in my website, and it's marymutisia.com. I have the PowerPoint for adults to read that is so simple, and I also have a version for children to read. I find it so interesting, and it's just a storytelling form for children to understand. I think any person above the age of 6 to 10 can read it and understand, because it's like a story form kind of thing. If you want this, it's going to be linked in the show notes. Go and read. But basically, yes, Uganda has complied with most of these things, and I am so glad, because now children are protected and now cannot be affected by the war. Now, what happened to the children that had been taken? They were brought home. Most of them were rehabilitated, and those that and cancelled, and those that did not have family were taken to stay with their kins. And birth certificates are also being provided. Now, nothing is perfect. They're working to continue with this. Now, it's 20 years later. The ICC has also not started their case, because they have not been able to find the leader of the LRA, so the case is still open. Some of the leaders have died, and one person is still not found. Now, will Uganda ever find justice about this issue? I don't know. I can only hope so. And for the children, I don't know. Right now, they must be adults. If you're Ugandan and you want to comment on this topic, please let us know in the comments. You can email me. Everything about how you can contact me is in my description box. I can give you updates the next episode. And in the next episode, we're going to be discussing the case of Senegal and the children that are begging in the streets. This is such an interesting topic. The committee dealt with it so well and so wonderfully. And I would like to discuss that with you. So I'll see you next time. I am having a flu that is not going. It's been 3 weeks. That's why you've not seen me in such a long time. But you're going to see me soon. This podcast is not bi-weekly. It's not weekly. It's bi-weekly. So you see me after every 2 weeks. If you don't see me, just know I'm fighting for my life. And get on your knees and tell the God that you serve to make sure I'm alive. Otherwise, I will see you when I see you. Be kind to one another. Spread love and peace.